Hi everyone, my name is Matt, and today I'm going to be doing my case study on Deshaun Watson and the allegations that he is facing. As a bit of a backstory, Deshaun Watson was drafted in 2017 to the National Football League, and he very quickly rose to become one of the best at his position. The NFL itself is one of the highest earning sports leagues in the world, and it brings in around $16 billion annually in revenue. Towards the end of 2019, Watson signed a 4-year, $156 million contract, and then in 2020 decided he did not want to play for the franchise anymore and demanded a trade. But the real story here begins in March of 2021, where the first lawsuit against him was filed. A female massage therapist filed a misconduct suit against him, and while at the time the details were unknown, as more cases began to add up, it became clear that this was a case of sexual abuse. Towards the end of the month, going into early April, there were multiple cases filed against Watson from various different massage therapists all across the state of Texas, and some of them required police intervention. So there was officially an investigation opened into Deshaun Watson, and we let a couple of months go by there where the police continued to investigate and lawsuits continued to pile up. There were over 20 lawsuits at this time. However, the NFL did not impose any restrictions against Deshaun Watson. They would have allowed him to continue to play, as well as not putting him on any sort of exemption list. However, the Texans decided against playing him, whether that was due to his trade requests or due to the lawsuits. So Deshaun sat out the entire 2021 NFL season. Fast forward to March of 2022, and a state grand jury declined to indict Watson on the criminal charges from the previous April. And while the lawsuits remained active, he was not going to face any criminal charges. That being said, trade talks around him were heating up. As mentioned earlier, he had requested a trade, so teams around the league recognized that he was not going to be arrested and began to put in trade requests for an NFL player who has over 20 sexual abuse lawsuits. Less than 1 week later, Deshaun Watson was traded to the Cleveland Browns. Not only was he traded there, but Cleveland also gave him a $230 million contract in which every single dollar was fully guaranteed, meaning that even if he gets suspended or even if he gets kicked out of the league, he still receives the full amount of contract. Now today, he continues to deny these allegations. As recently as a press conference this past Tuesday, there was a New York Times article recently that described in detail how Deshaun had 66 masseuses in 17 months, which averages out to about one massage therapist every 8 days. And the NFL is currently still deliberating on how long a suspension he will receive for his actions, if he will receive one at all. So overall, the NFL let him play in the 2021 season, and while the suspension may be imminent, there is not one that has been immediately handed down. What the concern of everyone is, however, is the length of the suspension, because the NFL has not always been consistent in its length of suspensions. There have been players who have been suspended for drug use for years, some have even been banned for life, whereas players who have committed domestic abuse or assaults even on the field have received less than 6 games of a suspension with full pay. There is also an option to put them in called the Commissioner's Exemption List, in which the commissioner of the sport has the ability to place a player on unpaid leave until the situation is resolved. Such is the example with Kareem Hunt. He was a running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was involved in a couple of cases of domestic abuse, was placed on the exemption list for 8 games, did not receive any pay, and when he came back, he got his full payback and he was back on the field. So some questions that the NFL and the fans by proxy have had to face through this whole process. Since Watson did not face any criminal charges, should he be allowed to play in the next season? Should the trade have been allowed to occur in the first place with all the lawsuits happening? And if he does get suspended, how long should the suspension be for? Now this case has a really big impact on the rest of the league, and it has the option or the impact to leave a black eye on the league for a while. Because for the NFL, the length of the suspension will really show how much they truly value their fans. There are a lot of fans, not only female fans or maybe the massage therapists involved were fans, but just fans of teams in general, especially Cleveland, who do not want to support someone they believe is an abuser and quite frankly a criminal, and they don't want to have to support him or have to watch him play football. So the length of the suspension will be able to show that, because while the NFL does value that, there are instances where they might not suspend a player as long because they know how much money or how much revenue he will bring in. And plus, the NFL has a very inconsistent history of suspensions, as seen by the chart. They've issued out a fair number of suspensions. However, most of them don't exceed 5 days, And most notably, they have never given out a suspension for domestic violence greater than 3 days. And while they are different cases, they are very severe cases, and they might end up having to break free of that normal stigma and offer a longer suspension. However, only time will tell. For the general public, this has been a very big deal because there are a lot of people picking sides in this case. And overall, this just shows a greater grasp of how the public really values the Me Too movement. For example, Watson has been facing over 20 allegations. Out of this recording, there are 26 allegations against him. And yet there are a lot of people who, well, a lot of them do believe the massage therapist. There are a lot of people who believe Watson as well. A lot of people are of the opinion that the massage therapists all want money and they're trying to extort some money out of him, whereas some people on the other side are saying that, well, they can't all be lying, or at least some of them have to be telling the truth. So it really shows a great divide on the public's opinion of how they feel about this case. And overall, it just picks into a grasp of how we feel about it, because there was instances when the first one or two abusers were speaking out, or one or two victims were speaking out against Deshaun Watson, where a lot of the public didn't believe them, as we have had cases in the past of one or two people reporting misconduct or sexual abuse against a celebrity, and they are quickly denied because people just assume they're trying to extort money. In some cases that has been true, in some cases it hasn't, but people are quick to assume either way. Ethically, the decision to let Deshaun play can be split up into either you view Kantianism or utilitarianism viewpoints. A utilitarianist, being somebody who wants the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, would say that Deshaun Watson should not be suspended and should play the length of the season. This is because while the women involved and other women or people who may feel slighted will be upset with the decision, overall, not only will the greater number of fans see a more improved product because Deshaun is good at football, but also the league would gather a lot more revenue as well via ticket sales or jersey sales. However, a Kantianist viewpoint, which would be to do good for every party involved, the most amount of good rather for every party involved, would say that he should be suspended and maybe not even be allowed to play in the league again because of how many people he has hurt and how those things will not go away with a year, or even there's not supposed to be like a time limit set on when you're supposed to overcome feeling guilty or feeling upset about this. Because Watson is, according to these women, an abuser, and having an abuser play football is just a reminder every day to them that he walked free while they still have to live with what happened. Now we move on to how journalism has covered this, which has been strikingly different between mainstream media and the sports media. Now, mainstream journalists and television reporters are more focused on doing the deep dives and actually going deep into context of what happens. For example, the New York Times released an article just this week doing interviews and going into a deep dive of what Deshaun Watson did and his troubling behavior, unleaking details that people hadn't known previously to the public, including the 66 women over a 17-month period, which was not publicly known before, and they're doing their research to make sure these women at least get their fair share, such is the case with HBO Max as well. HBO Max recently this past month had done a special where the two women involved were interviewed publicly on air for the first time and were able to give their side of the story that had previously not been heard. And meanwhile, sports journalists from major outlets such as ESPN, CBS, and NFL themselves have been seemingly blacklisted for even mentioning his name unless the news is positive towards him. In the bottom right is Adam Schefter, who is arguably the most important or most prominent NFL source and NFL insider. That tweet is him after the grand jury indictment saying that Deshaun Watson knew the truth would come out and the grand jury did not charge him, which was his last tweet about Deshaun since that date, which was March 11th. So there have been no tweets as even new news comes in. It's just been the last tweet that's been updated. So journalist questions overall. Should the premier NFL sports reporters be given a pass on not reporting, since it seems fairly evident they are being told not to? Or alternatively, should they be reporting on it regardless of supervision and try to call out their bosses in that regard? And overall, should reporters such as Schefter be obliged to remain neutral in their reporting, or should there be permission to add personal opinion at times? Now, overall, this is a very troubling case in reporting, especially in sports reporting, as not only are they not sharing the story overall, but these women's stories are not being heard by the greater public as a result of fear of negative PR. Reporters such as Adam Schefter have millions of followers on Twitter, and their tweets get shared with almost basically everybody that encounters any NFL media. So by not sharing these instances and not sharing the added lawsuits or stories, they are preventing people around the world from learning about these women and their hardships. There should be a way to hold companies accountable for this negligent reporting. At this point, these companies seem to almost be too big to be called out for this, because no one's really going to point fingers at ESPN unless you're a much smaller operation. And being objective in your statements, especially over social media, is crucial. You don't want to put a statement in front of anything, especially something as serious as this, that gives your opinion on the case. So in this case, Deshaun Watson, Adam Schefter's take on Deshaun Watson added a lot of personal opinion, which is something that he got pretty yelled at for on Twitter. If we wanted to look at this ethically, Rawls' veil of ignorance does state that when you remove context surrounding the case and surrounding things in general, you should be able to look at them objectively and take out all outside perspectives. So in this case, this is a journalist reporting on somebody with multiple lawsuits. So if you were to take this to the bare minimum level, if this was someone, a local town journalist reporting on a local town person with 20 sexual assault misconducts, you would want them to report on them. Same thing for a sports reporter reporting on a sports player. You would want them to do their job and report on the sports player. So overall, it's just something that should be taken into account, that according to Rawls' veil of ignorance, you should be able to report on this story. Now, this is still ongoing. The main issue here with the Deshaun Watson case is that the length of the suspension has not been decided. However, the NFL has still been lax in their judgment of going through the due diligence, which has been taken up by journalists. So overall, the NFL is at a bit of an ethical dilemma with how much they truly care about these women and their fans, and journalism as well has to make sure that they get the full reporting scope down. Thank you.